Hey everyone, and welcome to the program. I'll be talking about Juicy Sonic Magic, the cassette release from the National from Record Store Day Black Friday 2019. Stick around and we'll dive in. Hey everybody, we're talking about the National's triple cassette double live album from a couple years back. They recorded one of their, or two of their concerts rather, from the Greek Theater in California, and opted to do it as a cassette only release for Record Store Day Black Friday this past 2019. So this is an interesting one because obviously most releases from Record Store Day tend to be vinyl releases, but there are a limited number of cassettes and CDs that come out. This is a really interesting one. Now, they only released 1,000 copies of it. It was listed as a Record Store Day first release. So subsequently, they've released it on digital platforms. Not sure if they're planning to do it in any other format, like a CD or vinyl version in the future. But what is fascinating about this is the fact that they did this as a live bootleg. And, we're all, of course, familiar with live albums, but, you may, depending on how deep of a collector or music listener you are, you may or may not be familiar with bootleg albums and tape trading that was pretty prevalent in the 1970s and 1980s. So I'm a fan of the National, and I really wanted to pick this up, but the additional fact that it was done as an intentional bootleg really piqued my interest. So if you're not too familiar with bootlegs, it's something that I'll probably talk about separately in the future, but there tends to be two types. You have like the studio outtakes, unreleased recordings that tended to sneak out of the studio in the 60s and the 70s and even into the 80s, and they would get released as unfinished albums, pressed illicitly, or put out on compact discs once you get into the 1980s and 1990s. And that's one set of it. And then the other type of bootleg is live recordings. And those tend to be broken down into three categories, where you'll have, let's say, an artist will go out on tour and perhaps they did a radio broadcast and somebody taped it off the radio. It may float around through tape trading circles, but it also, might get pressed onto vinyl. It might get a release on compact disc. When I was in college in the 90s, I used to pick up a lot of bootleg CDs that would just come to campus from sellers, and they were pretty obtainable. And of course, people just trading cassettes and CDs at the time of recordings that might be made. But those tended to be really good sounding. There's bands like the Grateful Dead and some others that would let tape traders, they weren't necessarily, they're definitely not proponents of people, recording their stuff and then selling it for a profit. But bands like the Dead and some others are supportive of tape trading and within the community, as long as you're not making a profit off of them. And some of these bands would let fans, plug right into the soundboard and come up with high quality releases. And those can sound really good. And then the third type is audience recording. Somebody sneaks recording equipment in with them, and they record the concert, and those tend to be like wildly all over the board. So the radio broadcasts, the people that are plugging into the soundboard, those can be really clean recordings, because typically somebody's mixing it live, and they're just getting that raw feed out of the instruments. Some of them aren't always the best because they can also be what I would call sterile at times, where you can barely hear audience noise, and it just feels like it's coming out of a recording studio. But there's a lot of really great legendary concerts that have come out of either soundboard recordings or radio broadcasts. the audience recordings can be just a wild mixed bag, and now you still see it nowadays on YouTube when people pull out their cell phones and are recording clips and then they upload them. And if you're in like the third deck at a U2 concert in a football stadium, it's not good. And if you're likewise, if you are down on the floor, row 10, and right in the middle of things, it's obviously going to be much clearer, and the sound's going to be better, and it's just going to be an overall better experience, more like you're actually there. And the same thing went with audience recordings that led to bootleg albums. So, you would, in some cases, could get a really good sounding recording, and in other cases, it's muffled. You're picking up a lot of side conversations, especially during quiet songs where people are just talking to each other, and those aren't as enjoyable. What is really unique about this is they went into it. There is a legendary bootlegger who became known as Mike the Mike. He recorded all the major acts and all the major concerts in the 1970s and into the 80s from various venues in and around Los Angeles, like the LA Coliseum and Hollywood Bowl and whatnot. So what makes his really unique is the methods that he put into getting such good quality recordings, which were really just tapes that he would make and then distribute to his friends. He wasn't out to make a profit off of these. But he would go, and the National did a nice job. They actually did a short, about a 10-minute documentary explaining the process. Check that out, and it gives you a real sense of what happens. And they talked to one of his friends, and he would always bring a friend with him to a show. He would sneak his recording equipment in through a wheelchair, because nobody's going to search a wheelchair for recording equipment. So they would let him in. He would go in with his buddy. They would get front and center, a great spot, and then basically ditch the wheelchair, pull out his equipment, and have these microphones. I think they were going out of his hat even, directional. They're just picking up the audience or picking up the concert straight from the audience. So what they did with this is tried to recreate the same type of experience. They got the same tape equipment. They got the same microphones. They didn't sneak it in with a wheelchair. They did this all on the up and up, and did it in conjunction with the National. But they set it up. They recorded two concerts out of this, and they spread it over 3 cassettes. They had a little fun with it too. They did, they typed things up, but they also had some artwork that they went in with the tapes, and it was a fun, they drew things out in kind of similar fashion that Mike the Mike would do with his cassettes. He did artwork and did a really nice job with it. So this is just a really fun release. As far as the sound goes, I mean, it's a really good bootleg recording. It sounds like a really good audience recording. It's not of the same quality as a live release would be. They're not polishing it in the same method as you would get with a more polished release that's intended to be a live release coming straight from the band. But it is definitely more than listenable. It does put you into the audience, and it makes you feel like you are right there at a National concert. This is limited to only 1,000 copies. I wasn't sure if I was going to get this. I had known what my record store was getting. What they do is they ask for you to, if you're a regular shopper, to kind of give them your wish list, and then they will use that to make their orders. When I went to Record Store Day, Black Friday, this was on the list of unavailable. But it must have come in late because they had several copies and I was able to pick one up. It's been tough to see. I did come across this at one other record store several weeks later, but from what I understand, this one sold out pretty quickly. But if it's something that you're looking to get still, it's available. It's out there. There's not a ton of copies on Discogs, But if you're looking for one, it's not overpriced. I mean, they've been selling between 30 and about $60. There's a few copies listed as of this video for right around, $50 to $60. It's a cassette, so your audience might be a little bit more limited. The number of people listening to cassettes versus records is probably a little bit lower. It would be fun if they do another physical release of this, maybe do a CD version where they put it on what looks like blank CDRs, kind of in the sense of how they were done back in the 90s with CD trading. If they did a vinyl release, that would be really cool, like maybe a blank box with just plain white labels with, hand-etched information or reproduction to make it look like, very DIY. It's fun. So if you're a fan of the National, I'd strongly recommend checking this one out if you haven't already. What do you think? Did you pick this one up? Were you happy with it? Let me know in the comments. If it's one that you're still looking to get, I would highly recommend it. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I'd like to help grow this channel and hope to continue this conversation with more videos in the future. Thanks, everybody.